here, all the restaurants are booked, and there's a great sort of people drinking wine and the like. Of course then, if we move on in terms of the world, our economy is driven by demand for natural resources, and we can expect the standard of living to continue to rise as the world population increases to some 9 billion by the year 2050. We currently have about 6.5 billion people in the world, and in 1800 there was about 1 billion people in the world. So in 200 years we've gone from 1 billion people to 6.5 billion people, and I suppose if you applied the simple mathematics of 6 times in 200 years, if you went from 6 billion to 36 billion, I mean, it's an impossible position to sustain. I used this in a speech yesterday about the 9 billion people, and someone asked me, how can I justify the 9 billion people? Well, I don't have to justify it. I mean, that's what the projections say, and if it's anywhere near right, there will be 50% more people living in the world, powered along by economies of China and India. China has been the largest economy for the most of the last 2 millenniums, excepting the 19th century when the British Commonwealth was the biggest economy, and of course the US in the 20th century. There is little doubt that the Chinese economy will return to being the largest economy in the world, and it's only debatable about when that will happen. It will happen in 2025 or 2030. So the world is going to grow, and Australia is in an absolute fortunate position to have the minerals, the resources and the location. And of course there is India, and if you can look at the growth rates in India, India has a very large infrastructure construction program, and there's a whole series of prospects to underpin the changing economic development and the increasing standard of living. So that's a rather optimistic picture I paint for Australia, and it's taken against the backdrop that we've had rather a difficult time in the last 18 months or 12 months, but viewed in history, that's really not a very difficult period at all. Here's another graph that we look at in terms of where engineering construction is going. There's a little gap there, as you can see, from basically this year to the year 2018, and this is according to IBIS. We're really only going through a temporary phase. That engineering and construction is expected to grow to 140 billion by the year 2018, and I asked Phil Ribbon why he actually didn't fill the bits in between. He said, well, obviously people start to then debate it. But if you look at the trend, there is no doubt that the economy in Australia will continue to develop and the infrastructure business will continue to develop. Infrastructure in a historical sense has dropped away as the business cycles have dropped away as we dip into recession, and of course in this cycle we're seeing large stimulus packages provided by the government. Australia's infrastructure is expected to remain at high levels. Even before we went into this global financial crisis, there was a backlog of infrastructure projects, and our economy was constrained by the inability to respond quickly enough to booming export market. The federal government is to be congratulated for moving to address some of the shortcomings with the establishment of Infrastructure Australia and the stimulus package. There now needs to be priority projects, and these have been identified and they need to be progressed forward. The lack of availability and the cost of project funding has changed, and this needs to be recognised, and it's a big challenge in getting projects up in the PPP, BOT type projects. In New South Wales, Infrastructure Australia named the CBD Metro, Moorebank Intermodal Terminal, North-South Rail Freight Corridors and the F3 to Branxton Freeway as among the 37 priority projects in the pipeline. This list of projects is well known, and I don't disagree with it, but I think there is a far longer list of projects that need to be delivered to make Sydney a more livable, sustainable and productive city. Not at least is investment in the motorway network, including completing the missing links. The existing 18 billion of Sydney tollway network brings significant economic and social benefits. There's been studies that for every $1 million invested, on average, over 1.5 million hours of travel time is saved, 130 serious accidents, and nearly 4,000 tonnes of harmful emissions are saved. So the case for, and I suppose it's been argued this morning, the case for investment in infrastructure is a case that doesn't need to be argued. It's a case that really needs to be done to get on. Some of the latent subsidiaries involved in the operations of the Eastern Distributor, the Cross City Tunnel, Lane Cove Tunnel, Leighton Holdings commissioned SKM to examine ways to make the Sydney road network more efficient, equitable and sustainable. They looked at what should be done to the existing network to make recommendations of how to build the rest of the network here in Sydney. They considered congestion charging, such as used in London, Singapore and Stockholm, or high occupancy toll like that in California to reduce traffic. They considered distance-based tolling schemes such as those in Germany and Toronto to increase the overall efficiency of the network. They considered time of day tolls as used in France and other places, and shadow tolling as in the UK. For the existing network, they recommended here in Sydney allowing flexibility of toll charging by time of day and type of vehicle, retention of the M4 toll, an integrated toll network and pricing policy with long-term objectives of distance-based tollings and toll caps for single multiple toll trips. To complete the network, they also argued that alternative risk-sharing arrangements between the government and private sector, with the government accepting traffic risks and revenue risks and the private sector accepting construction and cost risks. Integrated transport funding so that the road user revenues can be based on a public transport model. And I suppose in recent times there's the fast train has been raised again, and Rick Ticini sitting out there in the audience. I think anyone that ever mentions a fast train to me again, and I think Rick would be in the same position, having spent $20 million or $30 million on a fast train before, I mean, these guys are dreaming. So that requires also a greater investment that we continue to talk about in planning and the better implementation of technology. And one of the great examples of technology, as I talked about earlier on, is the Octopus card in Hong Kong. In a modern rail network like Hong Kong, there is no one around the railway stations. You have this thing in Hong Kong called a stored value card, where you can buy your newspapers, go and get city tickets or theatre tickets, you can get ferry tickets, you can get transport tickets, and for some reason it can work in most parts of the world, but it's impossible to make to work here in Sydney. And of course there is the M4 that we talked about. I once commented that the M4 was started to be planned in 1992, and we're still talking about the M4 missing link. I also commented on my previous speech here that we won the Second War in 5 years, and here we are nearly 20 years later talking about the missing link on the M4. There's also another list of recommendations that the procurement process should be improved, and we continue to talk endlessly about the procurement process, and the necessary ingredient is political will and leadership to improve the procurement processes. In Hong Kong, for example, there is the most massive construction program about to be embarked on. I think they're going to spend some $40 billion in Hong Kong, including on the Kowloon Peninsula. They're going to build a railway station behind the Peninsula Hotel, 1.5 kilometre long, 12 platforms wide, and I think there's about 4 or 5 million cubic metres of materials going to come out to build that. They're going to take twin tunnels from Kowloon to the Chinese border, 28 kilometres long, to connect with the high-speed rail that's going to run to Beijing. They're going to build a bridge to Macau. They're going to build another